Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm incredibly excited to have Kate Jegede. It's Kate Jegede, right? Or
Yeah,
Catherine?
that's good.
Uh,
Kate's best preferred.
Kate. Kate Jegede is a British television host and author of a fantastic book with a background in science. She was first introduced to metaphysics as a teenager and by her mother, a former yoga teacher and education specialist. She developed a penetrating and enduring fondness for the self-empowering teachings of Neville Goddard and remains steadfastly devoted to spreading his message to this day. After completing her studies, Kate moved to Switzerland to work at the World Health Organization, developing educational resources for rural communities in sub-Saharan Africa. In addition to her academic science career, Kate has worked with the BBC Science Unit and BBC Radio Oxford and served as news editor of the International Journal of Africa Health, for which she conducted research trips, helping set up a learning resource and study center at one of Nigeria's forefront teaching hospitals. She's been published in internationally acclaimed science journal Nature. Kate has also hosted 2 science series aimed at young adults for Channel 4 in the UK, earning a BAFTA nomination. I'm honored to have you here. I'm so excited.
I'm excited to be with you.
So when I just read your book, and I really love the beginning of it. You tell a lot of your own personal story and the journey that you had gone on to discover or rediscover Neville Goddard. As people that have followed my podcast, a lot of my podcasts dealt with law of attraction and reality transurfing. And recently I've started really focusing on Neville Goddard. For a lot of people that go on this journey, people always end up coming back to Neville Goddard because his message was so pure and perfect and profound. And there's so much that there's so much that he spoke about. So it is a topic that I really wanted to go into detail. And just me going over these lectures is not enough. It's really nice to have an expert, somebody that's applied these teachings and seen results in their everyday life. So welcome, Kate, and tell me, how's it going today?
Thank you, Brian. I'm so happy to be with you. It's going very well. I'm busy, but I'm always excited to talk to people like you because it keeps me flowing. It kind of keeps me inspired. So in my day job, it's a lot to do with policy and government issues and social issues.
Well, in the UK, there's a lot going on right now.
Right.
So.
Yes. So this is not a great time to sort of work in the field of sort of policy advice and all of that. But this is something that what I really love about what I do is that my mentor in the House of Lords in the UK Parliament has been really supportive of me actually having this background in Neville's teachings and using that to give insight into things that affect people on a day-to-day basis. And it's not very often that happens. So I consider myself really blessed to be able to do that. I mean, I don't sit them down and talk about Neville per se, but I am very much aware of the fact that sometimes I go to a meeting and I'm not as prepared, or I'm aware that I'm not as schooled as some of the people in the room, but I can just be open to new ideas. And I leave people with their jaws hanging open, wow, we hadn't thought about it that way. And this is what I really get excited about, this whole metaphysical outlook.
Absolutely. I think you and I are a mirror because I feel the same way. It's exciting. The interesting thing about Neville, I mean, there's a huge field of literature that deals with creating realities and law of attraction. I mean, there's thousands of books. And a lot of people that start on this journey don't start with Neville. And then when they get to Neville, for some people, it's triggering because he's mentioning Bible phrases and they don't understand. And so it seems like for many people, they have to come to it from a different place. Tell us your journey and how you discovered or rediscovered Neville Goddard and chose to become more well-versed in his teachings.
Yeah, I mean, Neville was very much a part of my life growing up. So before I came on the scene, my mother was already a student of his. And so I love to share the story that in our, library at home, we had all the classic children's stories, but we also had Neville's books on the shelves as well.
How lucky
Florence
are you?
Scovel, Deniken, and all of these other philosophers and ideas. So it was something we grew up with. Yeah. So my mum thought nothing of, so we go to church on Sunday morning, and when we get home, when we're around the dinner table, she's reading to us, and we're young kids and we don't know what she's talking about, but we became so familiarized with the language. It was very much a part of us growing up. And my mother was somebody who always encouraged us to use this aspect of ourselves. She called it the greater part of ourselves. So if you wanted something, you didn't just say you wanted it. She would say, can you really feel yourself having it? And,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was so normal. So for me, as children, you think that what your parents do, everyone's parents are doing, right? So you're not you're not sort of aware that this is not the norm for everybody. But that is really where it first began. I think as a teenager, I began to explore the ideas for myself, because I was someone who was very much preferred my own company to the companies of others for one reason or another. And so I spent a lot of time reading as a teenager, and I loved his work. At first, I found it a little bit jarring. It didn't sort of mesh with what we were hearing at church. And I didn't like the way in which it challenged me. And so I rejected it at one point. I kind of thought, this is really offensive. I want to be part of the
Which
youth
seems
team
common.
at church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the choir, I was a church organist. I wanted to really do the religion thing and have
And your
that
dad
down
was
pat.
was a priest? Was a former priest?
No, well, so he was raised in the Jewish religion. My father was, but when he got married to my mom, he tried to, embrace Christianity in the traditional sense. He became an elder in the church that we were in. But he went back to the Jewish faith after we left the church as a family. It wasn't a terrible, thing. No one left under a cloud. It was just this kind of self-discovery that Neville says is actually inevitable in everyone. So we arrive at this. What we're going to talk about today through different routes. But for me, it was very much just being on my own with the ideas, turning them over in my mind, and actually experimenting with them. I think I wanted to prove Neville wrong in the beginning, and I found it was changing me as a person, which really excited me.
So the book, I don't think I mentioned the title, is Infinite Possibility: How to Use the Ideas of Neville Goddard to Create the Life You Want. So when you did research for this book, something I'm fascinated by that is still shrouded in mystery is Neville's background. Like there's so much information about what Neville said and stuff, but it's all we have is really what he talked about, and then some other references. Did you find any information about Neville and where he'd come from and some other stuff we might not have heard about?
It's really interesting. I did a lot of research on Neville, just starting with what I had online and stuff that my mother had, books and things that she had. But it was really strange how I sort of came to know him, and I felt that I knew him energetically, not just knew him as a character that existed in time and space. And I think Mitch Horowitz, who so many people know of has been fantastic as an historian in getting that kind of physical data that we all seem to really need before we can sink our teeth into something. So he was really instrumental in terms of bringing together stuff about Neville's military career and verifying some of the facts that Neville spoke about when he was honorably discharged from the army. And Mitch, I think, as part of his own journey, he needed to know that this stuff could be verified and that there was some sort of physical record. So there are records of where he lived in the States, where he came from. And even the other day, we found out, much to our delight, that some brands, household brands that we use, island food products and other like household cleaning products, were brands produced by his family in Barbados. They were the manufacturers and the distributors.
There's a company that's related to.
So there's so much, there's a real record of him. And I think that the human side of Neville makes it very, very exciting. People, through writing the book, have reached out to me on Facebook to show me little pictures and things that they've collected over the years.
Wow.
And it's been absolutely tremendous. I've been kind of got my little shoebox full of, trinkets and things. But, Neville was so real to me before all of that. That was just really nice to kind of accumulate those.
Anything unusual that we might not have heard about from his past that you in your study? Anything
I don't know
different?
how many people are aware of the fact that, obviously he grew up in Barbados. He was born there and grew up there. He was born in 1905. When he was, I think, 7 or 8, 2 people spoke to him. One, a woman who I believe was a servant of the family, and one was a man known as the Prophet, which, interestingly, Neville said he was the furthest thing you would think from, if you thought about somebody who was spiritual and holy. I think he drank or something like that. So it's not somebody you would traditionally believe was a holy man. But these 2 people spoke to him about the work that he was going to do. And I think that the maid in the family, I think she was a native of Barbados,
Right.
said to the mother, be very careful of this guy, of this child.
Mm-hmm.
He has a gift. He's going to do something remarkable in the world. And then the prophet again spoke to Neville about what his ministry was going to be. He had ambitions to be a dancer and to be a celebrity. And he speaks in one of his
Right.
lectures quite fondly about this hunger for fame that we all possess.
Right.
But it's something that gets transmuted into a desire to glorify the Father, as he affectionately speaks of creative energy or God. For some people, they don't like the term God. I personally love the term God.
Right.
So, people should just forgive me and allow me to use it in this podcast.
Yeah,
But
it's an
he
easy
spoke,
word to replace. So,
yeah,
but yeah, I get
but
that.
it means a lot to me.
Right.
But I have no problem if people take offense or don't like the word, but
Of course.
I'm using it because of what it means to me, right? So this God, the creator, what Neville describes as absolute causation, which
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to speak to a physicist last year when I was in the States, and he was talking about this. Yeah, they're really interested to know about the underpinnings of even the smallest elements of creation. But not to digress too far, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
So Neville talks about his ambition and his desire to be a successful actor and dancer and a
Right.
known personality was replaced by this work for God. And he said that we don't volunteer for it, that this thing that happens, this awakening,
Yeah.
is involuntary.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if many people are aware of that.
That resonates with me. I understand. I get that. So I'm fascinated also, before we get into some of his stuff, by Abdullah, this mysterious figure that came along and seemed to kind of teach him and kind of fill out some of the stuff that he taught. What do we know about Abdullah? How much do we really know about him in relation to Neville?
So Neville said that Abdullah was the only person that he would describe as his teacher. He
Mm-hmm.
described him as an Ethiopian. He said, quite sweetly, I thought, although some people kind of, he said that he was as black as the ace of spades, but, he used to dress himself in white linen with his
Right.
head wrapped in this white turban. I guess that contrast really made him something that people couldn't ignore. There isn't that much on record about
Yeah.
Abdullah, strangely, which is something that I would love to look into when I get some time. But
Yeah.
we do know that there are other students of his. Now, interestingly enough, Joseph Murphy, a
Right.
famous Christian
I saw
scientist,
that, which
was
was
also a
wow.
student of Abdullah, but it is said that there was a lot of purging of Abdullah from his notes by his estate after
Oh,
his death. I'm not entirely sure. I don't want us to sort of jump to the race issue or whatever. I have
right.
no idea why or if that's even true,
Mm-hmm.
but we do know someone sent a typed letter, which they say is authentic. I haven't had time to read it yet, in which Joseph Murphy is writing to a friend about this Abdullah. So we know that he lived in New York in the apartment that belonged to, I think, the son of the Secretary of State of the time. So he was
Oh,
somebody who was highly regarded by, the higher ups in
okay.
American society. He was someone that Neville said was sought out by
Mm-hmm.
people who were very, very important and wealthy, and they were spellbound by his wisdom and his information. Neville said that Abdullah was an expert in the law. I guess some people would call that the law of attraction, although that's not strictly
Right.
what Neville is describing. It's more the law of assumption, which is slightly different. And it's about
Mm-hmm.
training oneself to take on the consciousness of something rather than
Right.
pulling things towards you. Okay, so he said that Abdullah taught him the law and was almost impudent in his teachings, quite brusque and aggressive, because he wanted Neville to just get the message. This is not, he said, Abdullah taught him that there was no such thing as a little pregnancy. It's not, I'm getting there, I'm getting there. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And I
Right.
think that that's the kind of teacher you need. That's the kind of teacher I try to be
Right.
when people write to me and say, look, I have got this problem, or I've got this problem, or this isn't working out. And I say, look, this is what you need to do, just do it. And they come back and, oh, it's getting there. I said, no, it's either it or it's not it. And I think that Neville really attributes his success in putting these techniques into effect and measurable effect because of the way that Abdullah taught him. So for those who don't know, he was someone who loved the opera, and he also loved brandy. So, and ice
Right.
cream,
And ice
bizarrely.
cream. Interesting.
But I mention these things because it makes them more human. It
Right.
makes them more tangible, knowing the kind of things that they like to do.
Yeah. So there's the amazing thing is when you really start looking into it, there's of course, all the books, but so many lectures, so many great lectures. First of all, would you have a favorite lecture that you is one that really is your, I know it's pretty hard to do, but like a number one, that's your go-to favorite of all of them?
Yes, I think it's the Seven Eyes of God. And the
Ah.
reason why I chose that one is because it really gets to grips with a lot of the mysticism side of it. So when I first started with Neville's work, it was
Mhm.
really about learning these techniques and getting really excited about the fact that you could transform your lived experience and make it what you want to be. And then he spoke about the fact that after you really kind of satisfied yourself or satisfied your curiosity relative to that, one would begin to hunger after more spiritual
Mhm.
things. And it brought so much of what I was beginning to feel about the world, to feel about my human brethren, to feel about my role in
Mhm.
creation. It just really brought it into perspective and explained so much of what I felt was happening in my own life, the way I was transitioning, the way that things that were once important to me were no longer important, the way that I'm able to relate to people and how they relate to me, and so on. And
Mhm.
I think, yeah, the Seven Eyes of God is absolutely tremendous. And he says, there's a line in there, and it says, "For I was told not to hold one secret back." I mean, when I read that line, it just
Wow.
melts me. Just the
Yeah.
thought that there's this source of inspiration that's available to us as human beings, and we can begin to have some of those more pertinent questions about life answered.
Mhm. His use of words is almost Shakespearean. I just when I
Mm.
read some of it, I'm always just I taken aback. Even without the teaching, is just his language and the way that he would speak. So going further from that, so we one of the greatest things that you talk about in the book is that imagination is a question that you ask. It's first of all, it's a question: is imagination God? And what a profound and wonderful idea if you're not really understanding what God is to say that imagination is God. I wanted you to explain that a little bit better in the way that
Right. So
you
we've
talk
been
about it.
taught that imagination is an aspect of our, I guess, neurophysiological process, the normal,
Right.
an aspect of mind. And psychologists themselves say that they can't really explain the human mind. They
Hmm.
have ways of explaining the physical brain and the way it functions and all of that, but they really haven't. They're not satisfied, or I don't think that we've reached any sort of consensus on what mind really is.
Hmm.
But Neville says that if you think about anything in existence, before it becomes a thing, it is first a thought.
Hmm.
And imagination is the source, the nothingness, the, if you think about it, the atoms and the molecules or whatever. So I'm not using very technical language here, but if you think about anything that exists
Hmm.
being broken down into its constituent parts, there is something from which those constituent parts emerge.
Hmm.
And he's saying that that is imagination, the baseline source or absolute causation of all that is. So we've been taught that it's our ability to perceive things that aren't physically real yet. That's what
Hmm.
we understand imagination to be. And people think, oh, in my imagination, this happens and that happens. But it's saying that it is actually the substance that we call God.
Right.
And it is a part of us. Well, rather, we, you
Are a
and I,
part of
Brian,
it.
you sitting there, are a part of it.
Yeah.
We're just taken on shapes. If you think about anything that exists, being made of the same stuff at
Hmm.
its most fundamental level, it takes on a shape, it takes on arrangements. Physicists will tell you about the way electrons and atoms and all of that come together to form physical substances. And the same thing for you and I. We are atoms, molecules, whatever you want to call it, made into a shape. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you think about what a human being is and what it
Yeah.
can do. But substantively, we are still that same source
Hmm.
substance,
Right.
even though we've been organized into these fantastic machines called human beings. We are still of that substance, and that is what God is. So
Hmm.
if we understand that, and if we understand its language and its culture, we can begin to relate to it in a
Hmm.
way that's meaningful for us and can answer the questions of our own existence.
I mean, I think we've come to the point where we know that the stuff that's happening in our mind could not create that. I mean, that our mind is not, if you think that our little tiny brain is creating these incredible images when we imagine something,
Hmm.
then think again. There's no
Yeah.
way. So it's coming from somewhere else. That's the first
Yes.
thing that's a big realization. So when so let's go dive a little deeper. When you go into the Neville Goddard community, I think in some ways there's some misunderstandings of his teachings. Now, the first thing that I really resonated with you when you talked about, you had an event happen to you. It was and then you had been living strictly under the concepts of Neville Goddard, and you felt like it was like you blamed him for it. Like if there was that, and I had something similar. Like I was like, what did I do? This is, I blame, what did I do? And there was, I think you went through a little bit of spiritual lesson in understanding what had happened. And I wanted you to
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I was a young person, obviously, people know I was a victim of a crime, and it was devastating. It kind of caused my life to stop because all of a
Hmm.
sudden I felt really unsafe and I felt
Hmm.
betrayed. And coming from a place where you feel you're in control of what's happening to you, and then being transported to a space where you have zero control over what was
Hmm.
happening, was very, very confusing. And I like that statement that you made, that there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think that's what happened to me the
Hmm.
first time around. I misunderstood. So I was cherry picking the bits that appealed to me.
Hmm.
And I wasn't considering anything about my concept of self. That was something that I completely ignored, if you like.
Hmm.
So even though I was having success with the techniques and I could apply the techniques and I was pretty good at doing all of that, I wasn't considering what I was saying was true of me. And underpinning all of the things that I was going through was this idea that I was a potential victim. And it's, people find that a little bit difficult to take because they say, well, it sounds like you're blaming someone. It's not about blame, it's just the way things are. For
Hmm.
example, if I were to throw something out of my bedroom window, it would land on the ground because there's a law of gravity. There's going to be an outcome to
Right.
something. So if I had a concept of myself that was different to the one I had at the time, I may have had a different experience. I want to say I will have had it. I'm just trying to think
Right.
about your listeners. I'm not trying to be too hard hitting.
Right.
So it was very, very difficult. I thought that it was um, I didn't know about some of the esoteric lessons that I've come to learn about our interactions with others,
Hmm.
and the way in which our interactions with others do two things for us. They either give us an opportunity to challenge what we believe of ourselves, to really
Hmm.
test that we really are being honest when we say we believe something of ourselves, and they either just confirm that you are who you say you are. So, for example, if I can just digress for a moment,
Yeah.
if you believe yourself to be a kind, loving person, you're going to meet people who reflect that back to you, right? You're
Hmm.
also going to meet people that really give you an opportunity to check in on whether you are
Right.
kind, because they are going to be the opposite of that. And I didn't know all of those things happened. And so what I had to do was just strip back, just completely deconstruct what I thought
Hmm.
I knew, what I thought I understood, the path that I was going down with this work, and start from the beginning and really read it line by line. And I did that. I had
Hmm.
thesauruses and Bible concordances and Bibles and everything around, a notebook upon notebook. Funnily enough, we went to our storage unit the other day. I couldn't believe how many notebooks I had filled. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Just checking in and testing and experimenting. And then I realized that it's not sort of replacing one religion for another, or one set of ideas for another. It's about transformation of the soul,
Hmm.
the evolution of your psyche. This is what Neville's work is about. And I came to that inevitable point that he describes, that we all come to, this realization that we are God, and that there is nothing inevitable about our experience. Our experience really is in our own hands. And that was really difficult for me. Neville says that man's invisible nightmare is taking responsibility for his day-to-day lived experience.
Hmm.
And I wasn't looking at his work like that. I really was looking at it as, if I did what he said, all this good stuff was going to happen to
Right.
me, rather than me being aware that it is the consciousness that I adopt that determines what my experiences are.
Okay. So a lot of people can take this teaching and create an idea that's almost like they're in a solipsistic universe. They're the only living being, and that can be a disservice in some ways with people I've worked at. Some ways it can, but some ways, so when you're looking at somebody and your only thought is that you have complete control and domination over everybody that you meet and everything, it can kind of be a disservice. And I don't think, and maybe you can clarify, that Neville was saying that. Was he saying that we are just alone in this universe as solipsistic by ourselves and that everybody is just us? Or is there more to it? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Right. I'm just trying to formulate an answer that is kind of clear and concise. Right. So in terms of our experience, we're very much alone, but of course we're not isolated. We
Right.
are part of what he called a global community, and our work has an impact on others just as others have an impact on us. So
Mm-hmm.
he talks about us living in concert and everything being done in unity. And
Right.
our responsibility is to ourselves, not to others, in this sense.
Right.
We are given inspiration by God in the form of desire, and it is our duty to fulfill them, because in fulfilling them, we're making sure that the whole thing is working right. But what tends to happen is that people start to try to police and manage what other people are doing without considering their own actions. So that's the way in which we are on our own, if you like, in
Right.
terms of our responsibility to the global community is to fulfill the desires that we become aware of.
Right.
I don't know if that sort of,
No, yeah.
yeah.
One of the most popular teachings is the
Hmm.
everybody is you pushed out.
Hmm.
And so, and like I said, there may be some misunderstandings with that, because when I read, some people have taken it to a level that it becomes, there's the inconsistency, and they ends up attracting or creating things that are not within the lines of that teaching. So it's
Hmm.
always good to talk to an expert to explain what that means in a little bit more clarity.
Okay, so let me just add a little bit more to what I was saying before then. So
Sure.
this everybody is us pushed out talks about our connectedness at a really fundamental level. But
Hmm.
he says it's important to remember that we are individualized. We're not
Right.
supposed to become a tyrant and to exercise tyranny over each other. And that's
Right.
what happens when people try to control other people. No, we're all given the same gifts and resources. We're all in different packages because we've got different things to learn, right?
Right.
And that's what happens. You are a white male, I'm a black female,
Right.
and being in that body, it's going to expose you to certain experiences of
Hmm.
life that are going to be different from mine, but it all works together. It's all in concert. So it's not my job to control what Brian does, and it's not Brian's job to control what Kate
Right.
does. We're working in unison, but fundamentally we are all of the same substance. And what he is saying is that with the everybody is you pushed out, is that you're no better than the next person, so give up judgment. That's what he was
Right.
talking about when he's referring to we're all the same. So people sort of think, oh, because that person does this, has that lifestyle, or looks that way, I'm going to treat them like this according to
Right.
my own prejudices and subjectivities. But he's saying, no, you're all made of the same stuff, and in the eyes
Right.
of the creator there is no difference between us.
Some
That's what
people
he
will
was
take
talking about.
that and blame other people's actions on
Mhm.
themselves. Like, that person did that. How could I have made that happen? It
No,
doesn't, right?
it's absolutely insane. All that happens is when we are conscious of being something,
Hmm.
we are going to, when one is conscious of being something,
Hmm.
everyone else is going to reflect that in one way or the other.
Right. Okay.
That's what happens. But we are not responsible for each other's behavior. We can never
Okay.
be.
And so that is, people are misunderstanding. At least that's my. So the next thing that's very popular, and I want to get clarity on from an expert, is uh, finding a specific person. I think that people have taken some offhand comments and things that Neville went through and said, well, my ex from 3 years ago, I can attract my ex from 3 years ago, and that specific person, I have control to have any specific person, if whatever possible. I remember one of his teachings where he mentions Lot's wife looking back and becoming salt, which is kind of an idea that when we look back to our past, instead of looking forward, we become salt. And so
Mhm.
I've used that to explain, if you're stuck on somebody from your past, you're like Lot's wife. But I don't know. There's a lot of different references. What is your interpretation for somebody that is desperate to find that specific person and using Neville Goddard's teachings? What is the best way to interpret and utilize this in your opinion?
Right. So Neville says that when it comes to something like love, the worst thing that we can do is sort of fixate on a person, because that might not be the right person for you.
Right.
Or it could be a wonderful person, but they're only destined to live a short while longer. So you've invested all this and then they leave you after a short amount of time and you're in pain. The thing he says to focus on, and he uses his own experience, is to focus on your bliss. When he met his wife, Belinda, he was
Right.
married to another woman. He needed to get a divorce and get that all sorted out. He was married to a woman who I think worked with him in the theatre world, and he needed to get that divorce sorted out. But when he wanted to marry, he didn't think about Belinda. He hadn't met her yet. He thought about himself being in a blissful union with his right mate. And then he
Right.
met her. When he met her, he knew that it was the right person. He received that confirmation within himself, because it
Right.
wasn't something he tried to make happen. And that's the thing that is very important for us to do. If you have a desire that, okay, I want to be in a union in a relationship with someone, people start thinking, well, it could be this man or someone with money or whatever,
Right.
6'5" and whatever, what girls want, whatever boys want. But you have no idea what journey that person is on.
Right.
So if you say, how would I feel? This is some of the teachings where he says, if until you reach a certain level of discipline, you can use where it takes the physicality completely out of it. How would I feel if I were blissfully, if marriage is the ambition, blissfully married right now? And just leave it. You plant the seed and you leave it. And what happens is that you meet someone in the most unexpected of ways.
Right.
And somehow, when I met my husband in an internet cafe of all places, I was just thinking about being happily married. I wasn't really thinking about the kind of person I wanted to be with. It
Right.
sort of seemed like all the boyfriends that I'd had were kind of a bit meh, and it was fine. But when I met Deji, I was with my brother-in-law and my nephew at the time. I just said, oh my God, that guy is so cute. It was just,
Right.
it made no sense to me
Right.
at all. And I just couldn't stop thinking about him. I don't know how he did it. We suddenly found each other on Facebook and we're communicating. So it was so awesome the way
Yeah.
we came together. And it wasn't something that I did to make happen, because I couldn't do anything to make it happen. I
Right.
didn't know where he lived. I didn't even know his name. But he said that he came and sat next to me while I was on the computer, and he took my name off Facebook.
Oh, and then he
And he
friended
sent
you?
me
Oh, that's awesome.
So crazy stalker. I know, I'm only joking. No,
No,
but it was so amazing how we met. But because I had focused on being in this blissful relationship, in this blissful union, when I met him, I knew, because I had that calm reassurance. And we got married shortly after we became engaged. We were together for 2 years, and then he asked me to marry him, and we got married a few months after that. But it was just fantastic, and I'm so happy. We've been together nearly 10 years, and
Oh,
it just
that's
feels
awesome.
like yesterday. And that's because the one, God,
Right.
that's giving you the inspiration already knows who the person is going to be.
And if you
And
had
if you
focused on a specific person at that time, you might not have met him. You focused on the
absolutely.
feeling, and that feeling resonated. And so that's what I want everybody. I mean, I've had coaching clients, I've had people come to me that have taken his teachings and said, I can, I can attract Demi Moore, or I can attract a specific person because Neville said so. And I don't think that's what he was trying to say. So
He wasn't saying
thank
that,
you.
but I just want to mention one more thing though, Brian.
hmm
If you have a desire to be with Demi Moore for whatever,
Right.
just let it happen.
Right.
The
Right.
thing that goes wrong is when we try to make the thing happen. If you receive a feeling within yourself that, yeah, that person's for me. I'm not saying that that person is not for you. What goes wrong is when we try to make it so, we
hmm
take over from God. And Neville said the results
Let
come
God do it.
about by violence. And that means that things are going to go wrong, not just fisticuffs violence, but
Right.
it's
Mental
going to
violence.
go wrong. Absolutely. That's
Okay.
exactly a beautiful way of saying it.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Something I'm fascinated by, I know this is a bizarre question. I think I was just reading Out of This World. Is Neville saying there are parallel realities? he's talking about the fourth dimension and other possible. I don't know. Maybe not. I guess it's not. Imagination is our ability to perceive multiple different realities, I guess, is what he's trying to say, that are possible. But
Um, so the fourth dimension is the world that is not restricted or limited by our current physical limitation, right?
right.
So when you sleep, your real self does all the work. It leaves your body, it travels. He's talking
Right.
about all of that. It's the realm of consciousness, the realm at which anything that is considered is an immediate fact, physical fact in the physical world, the third dimension as we know it, in the human physical world. Things are done in order, they're done linearly, they're done in a chronological way, and we're limited by what we can do. Our bodies age, people get sick, all sorts of things happen. There is a limitation in terms of finances or maybe education or your
Right.
ability to move around. But outside of that, in the world of imagination, anything is possible. He
Right.
talks about someone who, in terms of these parallel realities, somebody who is confined to a wheelchair in their imagination could walk. And somehow they may find themselves walking if that's the path that they are to take.
Right.
So he's saying that he's talking about, yes, infinite possibility, if you like, outside of the
Exactly.
realm of what is possible to us in our human body. So he's talking about the two dimensions or the duality of man. So we have the side of us that has conscious thought and subconscious thought, but is confined to our physical bodies, what we can and cannot do. And then the a world in which we have no body, we have no limitation.
Right.
We are just part of this pulsating conscious energy.
So something that you just said, the real self when we go to sleep, are we ever in conflict? Is our real self imagining and attracting stuff outside of our realization? Are we seeing and encountering things in our reality, in our life, that our real self has brought to us that we are not aware of? Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we have things happen and we have maybe there's our higher self or real self has a role in that, even though I didn't imagine that, and it's a part of my journey. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I was doing in some of my earlier interviews, I was talking about this. So one of the things that's happened to me throughout my journey is that my perception has flipped. So I don't see my physical being, Catherine, as the one that's in charge doing the work. I see my conscious body, my subjective body, as the one that's doing all the work. So the real me is the one that has all the ideas, all the feelings, all the emotions, and my physical body is just acting all of that out. What happens is that as people become more familiar with this idea and they begin to communicate with themselves more, they will start to see that union get stronger, and it won't seem like such a dichotomous relationship. It really will seem, you'll see the unity of yourself in that. So it is correct what you said. What's happening in our waking lives, as Neville describes it, is that all the work that we, the real we, has done is being performed. And so when we go into the silence, immediately we close our eyes, Brian, we're actually seeing with our real eyes. Even though it looks black, with training, people will begin to see just as clearly as they are looking through their physical eyes. And so when you're in consciousness and you're in that state, you have all of these adventures, you have all of these desires, these dreams, ambitions, you go out and you seek for things. Whatever you feel, whatever you absorb as a emotive body, you then perform through your physical body. So sometimes it does look like, oh my gosh, where's this come from? But that only happens because a person is not in communication with their real selves. That sense of kind of separation between the two.
Right. So it's interesting that Neville Goddard was an actor. And he talks about states. So this is easy in theory, but how do we create a specific feeling for a specific event? We have a general range of emotions and feelings, but some of them meld together. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm
Absolutely.
blissful when I'm at the pool, but I'm also blissful when I have $100,000 in my account. How do so from what he's saying, we need to the feeling is the secret, but there's a specific feeling. So according to Neville, there's like a million different feelings, when sometimes in our own consciousness, it feels like we have 100 different feelings. How do we find a way to find that specific feeling? Does that make the question? How can I train
absolutely.
my body to have that specific feeling for that event that I want to manifest?
So one of the first thing I think for somebody who's new to this and coming to this and
Mm-hmm.
excited, you need to learn to quiet your body. So you need to spend time getting still and getting quiet. And
Mm-hmm.
Neville says the moment you close your physical eyes, you've shut out the objective world.
Mm-hmm.
When you first start this, and let's say you're lying flat on your back in a
Mm-hmm.
room that's sort of dimly lit and you're trying to relax, you're breathing deeply, you're going to be really, really twitchy because of
Right.
all of this multitude of emotion that's swirling around inside of you. So it's going to be almost impossible, right, to pluck out a single feeling that
Right.
corresponds to a single event. But what you can do is ask, how would I feel if? And you can be very specific about what comes after that ellipsis. So like,
Mm-hmm.
how would I feel if I had $100,000 in my bank account?
Right. Okay.
So what will happen is when you ask that question, you're talking to your God substance self,
Mm-hmm.
and the feeling associated with that will come up. Now, it takes a little bit of practice. Some
Mm-hmm.
people get it quicker than others. So I'm not saying it's going to take someone months or years to master,
Right.
but it takes a little bit of practice to actually trust that the moment you ask that question, whatever you feel is the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And if you repeat that process over and over again, the feeling will become stronger. But what you need to do is really start by training yourself to become still and just
Mm-hmm.
become aware of your being housed within your physical garment. I think there's so
Mm-hmm.
much, especially in New Thought teaching, that focus on our physicality and sort of trying to get your physicality to do what you want it to do,
Mm-hmm.
rather than actually focus on disciplining your conscious
Right.
being, which is the more significant being in this process. So if you are unable to locate a particular feeling,
Mm-hmm.
then you can use the how would I feel if question.
Okay.
Another thing to do is actually start isolating feelings that you do recognize. And that's a
Mm.
great way to train yourself to just lock onto singular feelings, or feelings at least that are a little bit more condensed and formed than sort of just this soup, this cosmic soup
Right.
that you're swilling around in. So you could say, okay, I'm going to lock in on how I feel when I go to the movies, or how I feel when I'm on a date, or how I
Mm-hmm.
feel when I'm alone reading a book or drinking a glass of wine, or whatever it is.
Right.
And as you do that, you're beginning to discipline yourself to cherry pick, to isolate feelings. When you've done that, you can then start to, Neville said, feel after specific feelings. So in your quiet meditative state, you just begin to imagine that you are feeling something,
Mm-hmm.
even if the feeling is not really super distinct. Just begin to imagine that you're feeling it and see what happens. I'm happy to go into more detail, but I
Oh
want
no, I
to sort
love
of
it.
I kind
Thank
of
you.
feel
So feeling
another
is an
question.
ambiguous and loaded word. The word
Mhm.
feeling, does it mean what I feel in my heart, my stomach? Does it mean my skin? Does it mean the way I'm breathing, the warmth on my face? How much how much is feeling? How much am I missing when I say, okay, well, I feel a little butterflies in my stomach, but there's more to that feeling. So sometimes I worry I'm not being complete. I can bring up a feeling of butterflies in my stomach, but I'm not being complete. And so I'm just getting a little bit of that feeling. Is there more texture is there more that I can do? Does my question make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I sometimes forget. I'm so familiar with the terminology that I
Right.
forget that people do have these types of questions. So that's I'm grateful for you
Hmm.
to you for asking this. So esoterically speaking, or metaphysically speaking, feeling has a different meaning. It has a different connotation to what we physically understand feeling to be. So feeling is
Right.
everything that you've described in the human body, right? But
Hmm.
esoterically, feeling is an intelligence, it's a language, and it has a vocabulary.
Okay.
So it's a lot more rigid and controlled than the way we experience and express it in our human bodies. So when we
Hmm.
talk about feeling, we're actually talking about specific vibrations that correspond to physical correlates.
Okay.
So it's about if you think about, I don't know, plasma in a lab and sending an electrical current through that plasma to make it do something, maybe to luminesce or to move in a certain way or to heat up or move faster or slow down. That's what we're talking about. When we speak about feeling, we mean we're sending a specific instruction
Hmm.
to this substance and telling it what form to take. So that's what Neville refers to when he's talking about feeling, which is quite different to the way we experience feelings, either physically or emotionally in our human bodies.
Okay.
Do you need any more
No,
detail
that's
about that?
perfect clarification.
Hmm.
So one thing as you get into later books by Neville, and he started to go away from the law a little bit and focus on the promise. The promise is a little bit vague to me. What is your interpretation of when Neville says the promise? He's saying that we every time we die, we come back until we reach a certain point, and it's a promise. Is it beyond, moving past our incarnations? Is that what he's saying?
Well, absolutely. So he's talking about it as an inevitable imperial event that happens to us.
Hmm.
So as we're cycling through life, learning all the lessons that we're here to learn. So he describes the world as a schoolroom. You spoke about his Shakespearean language. He says
Hmm.
that, Shakespeare said all the world is a stage, and we're
Right.
here playing our different parts, learning from our experiences and so on. The promise is what happens once all of that education is over, when you've learned everything that you've been sent to learn.
Hmm.
And we have, it talks about this in the 7 eyes of God that I mentioned before.
Hmm.
So you go through these stages of your own individual journey. So he talks about when we're just competitive and it's every man for himself, and then we become slightly more sophisticated and we learn how to deceive each other, and then we reach the level of Christ. When the 6th eye opens, we
Hmm.
actually begin to care for each other. You and I may think we care for each other, but it
Hmm.
actually is a lot deeper than that. It's
Right.
kind of, one would lay down their life for someone who hates them. I
Hmm.
don't think we're being asked to do that,
Right.
but it's talking about these levels that we go through as our soul evolves. And at the end of that, we are incorporated into the body of love. So that means that all of the whole purpose of us being here in the first place, our entire understanding about creation itself, is opened at this point. And then we're sent back into the world to deliver a message to humankind. And after that, we are resurrected. So he says, while we're cycling, we're restored to life. We put on different garments. We have different experiences.
Hmm.
But at the end of all of that, when we quit finally,
Right.
that is where the promise takes place. Now, once we are in those kind of end stages, if you like, certain different events take place, which are a sequence of spiritual events that confirm that one
Hmm.
is about to exit finally. But it's very important that he said you must put first things first. We're not going to attain to the promise until we've learned everything we need to learn here.
Right.
So it's really important that we put all of our energy into learning how to fulfill our desires through the conscious use of imagination. That
Hmm.
is what is important, because the promise will take care of itself. I don't think
Okay.
it's something that anyone should get anxious
Don't be
about. So
worried about.
people become
Right.
aware about it. People become
Yeah.
aware of it, rather, because Neville says they're on the verge of some change, some transformation. And
Hmm.
we all reach this point where, hold on a second, life isn't what I thought it was.
Right.
5 years ago, 5 months ago, there's more to it. My interactions with the rest of the human race is different.
Hmm.
My outlook on life is different.
Right.
Why is that? And as we begin to inquire, we begin to receive more information, and it just gets more and more exciting and beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think people make a mistake with Neville is they will try it's like they're at the buffet and they'll try to eat too much. They'll try to imagine too many things at once. So I wanted to get your opinion about this. I think that he really is saying focus on one thing and really bring it about for a long period of time. What is your interpretation of that? And
That's absolutely right. It's really important. If you think about, if somebody wants to ride, what's that thing they do, the Tour de France or whatever, the
right.
cycling thing, you've got
Right.
to learn to ride a bike first. So could you imagine if you couldn't ride a bicycle and you
Right.
said, I'm heading off to go and
Right.
compete with those pros in the Tour de France? You're not going to get very far. But once you learn to ride a bicycle, then the world's your limit. You can go
Right.
mountain biking, you can go dirt biking, you can do all sorts of weird and wonderful things,
Hmm.
but you have to learn to ride the bike first. And this is what he's saying about this ability. If you focus on one thing, your confidence is going to grow. You're going to build within yourself a core strength, which then will enable you to use this
Hmm.
ability in any way that you choose. But you have to make sure that you meet the requirements, you understand what's required of you, and that you're able to deliver on those requirements. And this is what happens. I get countless emails. I've got some I promised to answer tonight, but people saying it hasn't worked or this hasn't worked. And
Right.
I said, and when I pick through and I'm able to kind of deconstruct what they've complained about to me, I say, you're not fully understanding what's being asked of you here.
Mm-hmm.
So this isn't about, if I wish hard enough, this thing is going to happen for me. It's about understanding what is meant by things like feeling, what is feeling, what is meant by attention, what is meant by commitment, prayer, all of these sorts of terms. Maybe I should write a glossary of terms
Right.
and just hand out to people so they understand that there are significant differences. When I started to get revelation and understand the language, I went back and read some of the early Neville, and the techniques that seemed so straightforward were a little bit
Yes.
more detailed than they first appeared to be. And so it's about a willingness to actually let go of what you're feeling, one feeling, and replace it with another. So people think they can force something to happen. And I learned all sorts of analogies that I share with people. For example, if you're holding something in your hand, oh, let's say I'm holding my phone and I'm saying, I really want a phone, I really want a phone. People don't realize when they're doing that energetically, if you've already got something, you can't force yourself to have that thing you already have.
Right.
It's about accepting, looking down and saying, oh, wow, I've got a phone in my hand. This thing is, even if you don't physically see it. So it's really, there are nuances to the
Right.
technique. And Neville says they're simple, but they're not easy. They
Right.
take dedication and they take careful study and practice. And he said, you're not going to get it overnight. He
Right.
said, think about it as like somebody learning to be someone on a journey to becoming a concert pianist. They start with the rudiments of musical theory, and they learn the scales, and they
Right.
learn, and they get their finger techniques going, and the floating elbow. I'm trying to remember all my piano lessons. They get all of that. But you have to practice every day. If you
Right.
don't practice, you're not going to be able to do what you want
And
to
he's
do with
saying,
this
yes, you
instrument.
should every day. It's harder than the plowman share, as he says.
Exactly.
It's hard. You don't go into it easy. That even though it's not physically hard, there is some effort that's required that you put into this. And so people start demanding immediate results after they've meditated one time or visualized, or it doesn't work like that, right? So,
Absolutely.
so what are in your experience after you've started to teach this, common mistakes? Are those the common mistakes that people make?
I think for me that the most common is this thing called visualization that people get from New Thought
Mhm.
philosophy. I think so. Neville said something really wonderful. He said, "Don't don't visualize yourself doing something," which is like being in a movie theater and
Mhm.
watching
Right.
yourself on screen. Imagine yourself the actor in the scene, and
Right.
this is where using your subjective senses comes in. So if you think about our real selves being a body just like the body we have,
Mhm.
except that it has no limits placed on it, it is able to achieve anything. He said one of the first things we need to do, if I can digress for a moment,
Yeah.
is first believe that anything is possible to this body of imagination.
Right.
So that's the first thing. And a lot of people, Brian, don't believe
They
that.
don't believe. No.
So if you say, okay, I am aware that I can't do so many things in this body, that's
Mhm.
fine, but you have to, he said, it is imperative that you absolutely believe that with imagination, all
Mhm.
things are possible. And then you recognize that you have the five senses that you can employ in that conscious body just as you have in the physical. So remember, the physical body is just an acting out, an out picturing, if you like, of what you
Right.
can do with your consciousness, except that there are no limits. So when you're imagining yourself in a scene that confirms something is true, and maybe I want to be, I don't know, an actress or something like that,
Right.
in a movie, I'm going to feel stuff, feel my co-actors, I don't know if that's the word, I'll smell stuff, I'll smell the environment, I might taste
Right.
food, I might perceive fragrances, whatever it might be. You must experience what you are desiring with your subjective body to a certain degree of intensity before it can become a physical reality.
Right.
But people are sort of thinking, sort of wishing it into being. Somebody said to me, I really, really, really wanted this job that I went for, and I thought about it and I did everything you said. And I said, you kind of done everything I said because you don't have the job.
Right.
So the important thing is you have the job. Even if you're getting up and going to another job,
You have
when
it.
you're on the train or in your car, you, even though your outward body is going to company A, your conscious body is going to company B. And if you are able to persuade yourself that you are really in that other place, your physical body is going to follow.
Right. great thing about your book is that you have these wonderful exercises. You've distilled a lot of these teachings. So I'm going to tell anybody, if you're wanting to learn about Neville, to read your book. And you have these wonderful exercises. There's so many that we could go over. What is your favorite exercise of Neville's? Let me start with, what would be your favorite exercise that people may not have heard of? Because there's so many that, you see references. Is there a kind of a rare exercise that's one of your favorites that Neville suggested that you use?
Um, one of my favorites is the magic mirror, because it's so easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many people are familiar with that or not. People seem to get excited when I describe it,
Right.
and talk about it. So if you think about the fact, every single day we get up, we brush our teeth, we shower,
Mm-hmm.
we do our hair and makeup or whatever, we get dressed, we use a mirror, right? And
Right.
we look into a mirror, and so many people are unaware of the fact that when we are looking at ourselves in the mirror, Brian, we're judging. We're
Yeah.
judging ourselves from head to toe, and it's subtle. And especially if you're getting
Right.
ready quickly, you're about to head out to work, you're judging. Oh God, look at that, the weight, the look, the skin, the people are just complaining. People
Every
aren't
time.
aware about how much they complain about themselves.
Right.
And if you have time, I would say to someone, to say to an individual, maybe do it on a day where you're not rushing off somewhere. Just look
Right.
in the mirror and just become aware of how much you're complaining. That's just something just to get you into the right frame of mind. Okay, this
Right.
is happening. So this exercise, I call it magic mirror.
Uh-huh.
It's Neville. Just let me give you some background to this technique. It's beautiful. It was a man who had facial tumors that used
Right.
this technique that Neville described. You may be familiar with this from his
Yes.
teachings. And even though he had those tumors and this disfigurement of his face, all these unsightly
Mm-hmm.
lumps and bumps, he shaved every day as though his face was perfectly smooth. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if we can think about that for a moment, that
Yeah.
really takes a lot of discipline to do. Um, I use magic mirror when I need to lose weight and I don't want to give up the stuff I eat.
Right.
So when I was
Okay.
younger, I used to model, right? So
Right.
and I couldn't give up food, but I can
Right.
think myself slim.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people it seems odd until you try it. So this is what's so exciting about magic mirror. So when
Mm-hmm.
you're looking into the mirror, you can do two things. You can close your eyes or you can use soft focus. Now, soft focus is when you're looking at something but not really looking at it. So you're looking at the mirror, but beyond the reflection through the mirror. And then what you can then do is reflect back a different image to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with soft focus.
Oh yeah,
It's,
that I
yes,
love it. Yeah. That makes
right. So
sense.
if you feel confident enough, use soft focus. If you feel that no, what you're looking at is not what you want to see, close your eyes and just imagine that the person getting in dressed in front of that mirror is the person you want to be. Now you can focus on something physical
Mm-hmm.
or a character trait. Either is up to you. It must be one thing.
One thing.
So I used it to clear up my acne when a few years ago I
Mm-hmm.
had terrible acne, and now people can't believe my skin. People don't believe I don't wear makeup,
Right.
but it works. This is how excited I am
Wow.
about this. And what you want to do is take some deep breaths,
Mm-hmm.
relax, and focus on this thing that you are looking at, this person that you want to be. Now, if it helps, you can use statements like, oh my God, I can't believe how, whatever,
Right.
gorgeous you are, how clear your skin is. Just say that. You could do that for 1 to 2 minutes. This is
Right.
how awesome this is. But you do it every single day without fail. Don't treat it like a chore or something you have to do. And it's very important when you're taking your breaths in and out. If you feel yourself tightening up, don't do it at that moment. It's really important that you're loose, that you feel good about it. And a good sign is that if you feel a tickle above your solar plexus leading right up to your epiglottis, that point at the back of your throat, then
Right.
you're in the right frame of mind. This thing must excite you.
Okay.
After you've spent your 1 to 2 minutes praising yourself, talking about
Mm-hmm.
how awesome you are, you want to allow a gentle smile to be on your face. You breathe in and out with your eyes closed or in soft focus, and then you go about your day. I guarantee after just a few days of doing this, people are going to start to see a difference.
I guarantee I'm going to do it right after we're done. So you got me all excited. So
It's so powerful.
yeah.
you're not doing anything physical. And what I really love about this technique is that it's one of the techniques that really begins to establish a connection between your conscious self and your outer body.
Right.
And that's what I've really gone for in the book. Now, people have said, oh, the book isn't long. One of my favorite Neville books is Your Faith is Your Fortune. Anyone who has that book knows it's pretty thin, but it's so impactful. And it was the inspiration for the way I wanted to construct this book. I wanted it to be impactful, complete guide, absolutely everything you need to do. I'm teaching you to ride the bike with this book. It
is.
And then when you've learned to ride the bike, go wherever you want.
Yeah.
Take your bike anywhere you want. That's what my aim was, my ambition was. So these exercises are all about really establishing that connection. They build on each other. They get increasingly more challenging as the book progresses, but by the time you spent some time with one and you've moved on to the next, you're ready for that next one. So it's not going to feel like such an effort for you. Sorry, I've gone on and on.
No. So many good exercises I've used. Metanoia, the psychosexual act. I'm just telling, buy the book, go out right now and buy the book. These exercises resonate. They're powerful. And thank you, because a lot of people don't have time to read thousands of pages of Neville's lectures. They can just get your book, and it's a good starting place. And once they're riding the bike, they can go back to those lectures. And that's why I'm so grateful to have you on. So since you wrote the book, have you had any more realizations or discoveries? It's ongoing, especially with Neville, it's ongoing. Have you had any new realizations that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I've, with my second book, which I've been working on for ages, I've written it, I've pulled it apart, written it, pulled it apart. I think really what I would love to do, what I am doing with my second book, is actually bringing in more of the glossary of terms. I think I've taken it for granted that people understand what every element of the exercises mean. So it's when we talk about things like feeling, we're actually talking about a language. So when we are learning to identify our feelings, it's literally like learning vocabulary of a language. And this is something that's really important to know when we're talking about we don't do visualization in this metaphysical world. We are the actor in the scene. We're not watching the actor perform. We are the actor in the scene. So we're experiencing with our subjective senses. Things like when you've closed your eyes, people don't know this. Even though you might see black to begin with, you're actually looking through your eyes of consciousness. Once your physical eyes are shut, instantly you shut out the objective world, and you can begin to do whatever you want in consciousness. So these are little things that I think are really important to know that are going to transform people's experiences with this work. It's not to say that, as you said, the book is a great starting point, and I do answer questions on Facebook. I allow people to write to me, and I go into things like the terminology a bit more, because I do realize that that's something that people need as well. So I did feel that inspiration that I really need to get into a bit more detail about what Neville means when he says certain things, because I think that will really clear up a lot of the miscommunication that's going on.
Right. Do you know, looking back, when he was giving these messages, the amazing thing, this is all like 40s or 50s that he's saying this stuff on the radio. Do you know if he faced, because he's such a good, he's like a master of law of attraction. He's probably not going to mention it or focus on it. But was he facing opposition? Was there protests against Neville? Were people, I mean, that would be such a natural thing to happen with his message. Do you know if he faced that?
He spoke about, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but that people would sometimes get violent. He didn't really, to my knowledge, speak about great protests or people wanting him to come off air. I think there was a really awesome article, I think it was in the New Yorker, about someone who had attended, a journalist had attended one of his lectures, and said that I think because he didn't have the audiences of someone like Emmett Fox, that he didn't draw that kind of attention to himself. He didn't have those massive crowds. I don't know that people...
Maybe it was because he was in California and it was just a little bit
more
more
he did a lot of work in New York as well. He traveled around. He was in Milwaukee and different places. And yes, he was in LA, and maybe, you know, people are just much more chill, as I understand.
At least he talks about how his caller was on, you know, we go into a restaurant in New York and they tell and how it was different in LA.
In LA, and he was very, very fond of LA, and the home he left his daughter was
just always wondered, I mean, even now, just back then, that I'm surprised that he didn't encounter as much opposition as you would have thought. Maybe it was part of...
From what I understand, it's not that he didn't, he just really knew how to discount it. And he
Right.
said that his fiercest critics became his most dedicated
Right.
students. The criticism of him then was that he was a lunatic. That was really what people said of him in those
Right.
days. Oh, the mad mystic. He had a name. He was known as the mad mystic of,
right.
I think, 38th Street or something like that. He had one of these names that people were calling him. But Neville said he knows why they're doing it. It made no difference. And that's something I see in myself.
Right. It's
when
a
people
learning
say, "Oh
from
my God,
him."
don't people say stuff?" You know, I have to share this story with you. When my book first came out, someone wrote to me. I can't remember what he called himself. He was a white separatist, right?
Right.
So I'm talking to this guy, and he was like, "Oh, don't you dare tell anyone that I wrote to you." And I thought, why would I tell anyone that you wrote to me? Tell me, what's your question? And he was absolutely stunned that I was relating to him. And I'm not saying this to boast, Brian. I'm just saying
please.
that I get it. We're all going through something. We're all learning something. And Neville says that many of us don't realize that we act under compulsion. We're cast into different roles for learning. And this is what he said: everyone is you pushed out, meaning that there is no difference between myself and that young man. And that's what I told him. You are me, I'm you.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Whatever you do to me, you're doing to yourself. Whatever I do to you, I'm doing to myself. So I choose to treat you, to receive you with love, and to treat you with love. And it was very, very cool. I heard from him about 4 months ago, after, you know, he wanted to tell me how he was getting on in his new job. So, you know, we get so caught up in what we're doing, but no, if we just focus on the fact that we're learning and we're heading in one direction, it just becomes really, really awesome. And that's not to make light of the experiences that people have, not at all. I'm completely empathetic to the challenges and frustrations we all face. I face my own, but it's not to lose sight of what's important. And that's what I really took from Neville when he talked about people who didn't like him. It was like,
yeah, I love that. And it's the biggest from everyone as you pushed out realization for me is everybody I look at in the past, I would say I would find disgust or anger or hate with how could they be like that. And now there's a part of me that says I'm that person and I can understand. I start to understand everybody, even whatever it is there. I guess I could see myself doing that if I was under that particular script or compulsion.
Exactly.
So. And once you have that, it's amazing. You're going to relate to everybody differently because everybody, even the worst person, I understand. I understand.
Absolutely. And Neville said once we reach that, sorry to cut you, reach that realization, he says, you forgive anyone for everything they've ever done.
Yeah.
And you in turn receive forgiveness for anything you've ever done. And I think what an incredible way to be. I know how I want to use the time I've been allocated. I don't want to use it kind of getting all tied up in knots. And if I can help someone to feel better about themselves, yeah, I'm going to do it. That's what I'm all about.
Well, this has been such a joy and I've learned so much. And so everybody needs to run, not walk, to get Infinite Possibility by Kate Jegede. Infinite Possibility, How to Use the Ideas of Neville Goddard to Create the Life You Want. It's a wonderful synthesis of his ideas. It's a great starting point to learn and some great exercises. Thank you and welcome to the Reality Revolution. I hope to have you on again as we go deeper on some of these subjects. And if I have further questions, I will definitely be reaching out. Okay?
It's been an absolute delight to speak to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Kate.